March 14th, 1978. Bloomfield Township, Michigan, when construction workers broke ground for a new shopping plaza on the former Whitmore estate, their excavators struck something that shouldn't have been there. A pattern of small wooden boxes, arranged in perfect rows, 3 feet beneath the soil. Inside the first box, wrapped in a child's blanket, investigators found the skeletal remains of a 7-year-old girl. Cradled in her arms was the skeleton of a rabbit. They found 5 more boxes that day. Each one contained a child. Each child held a rabbit. The medical examiner's preliminary report noted something that made seasoned detectives step back from the scene. The children's bones showed no signs of trauma, no indication of how they died. It was as if they had simply fallen asleep. But the truth was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Before we uncover the truth about the rabbit Hutch bodies, children found buried with their bunnies, a family annihilator's twisted burial that haunted Michigan for decades, make sure to subscribe to Fear Sermon and ring that notification bell. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers, so drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's descend into one of the most disturbing family murders in American history. To understand the horror that unfolded in Bloomfield Township, we must first understand the America of the mid-1970s, a nation still reeling from Watergate, struggling with economic recession, and watching the traditional nuclear family begin to fracture under the weight of changing social values. Bloomfield Township in 1974 represented everything Americans wanted to believe about suburban prosperity. Located just northwest of Detroit, the community had insulated itself from the urban decay consuming the Motor City. Tree-lined streets bore names like Peaceful Valley Road and Harmony Lane. Station wagons sat in every driveway. The local newspaper's crime blotter rarely reported anything more serious than a stolen bicycle. The Whitmore family seemed to embody this suburban ideal perfectly. Thomas Whitmore, 42, worked as a senior accountant for one of Detroit's remaining automotive suppliers. Neighbors described him as quiet, methodical, the kind of man who mowed his lawn in perfectly straight lines and always waved hello with a reserved smile. He wore the same style of wire-rimmed glasses that had been fashionable a decade earlier. His brown suits never varied. Every morning at exactly 6:47 a.m., his tan Buick LeSabre backed out of the driveway, and every evening at 5:33 p.m., it returned. His wife, Patricia Whitmore, 38, seemed to exist in his shadow. She'd given up her teaching career after the birth of their first child, as was expected of respectable mothers in their social circle. She served on the PTA committee, hosted coffee mornings for the other mothers on Peaceful Valley Road, and attended Sunday services at Bloomfield Presbyterian Church without fail. Those who knew her remarked on her perpetual nervousness, the way her hands never quite stopped moving, how she laughed a beat too late at jokes, as if she'd had to think about whether laughter was the appropriate response. The Whitmore children were 6 in total, ranging from 14-year-old Margaret to 3-year-old Timothy. They appeared in family photographs like Stair Steps, Margaret, Robert, Susan, David, Jennifer, and Timothy. Margaret, the eldest, had inherited her father's reserved demeanor and her mother's anxious eyes. She earned straight A's at Bloomfield Middle School and played violin in the youth orchestra. Robert, 12, excelled at mathematics and spent hours in his room building elaborate structures from toothpicks. The younger children, Susan, 9, David, 7, Jennifer, 5, and Timothy, 3, were described by teachers and neighbors as unusually well-behaved and remarkably quiet. But there was something else the neighbors noticed, though few spoke of it at the time. The Whitmore children rarely played outside. When they did appear in the backyard, they moved in a subdued manner, speaking in whispers, always glancing toward the house as if awaiting permission for every action. Birthday parties were declined. Playdates were politely refused. Patricia explained this away with vague references to allergies, sensitivities, her children's preference for quiet activities. The one exception to the children's isolation was the rabbits. In the spring of 1973, Thomas Whitmore constructed an elaborate hutch in the far corner of their backyard, a 2-story structure with individual compartments, each painted in pastel colors. He brought home 6 rabbits, 1 for each child. Margaret's rabbit was white with brown patches named Clover. Robert's was a sleek gray called Shadow. Susan's rabbit, Dandelion, was golden-colored. David's rabbit, Pepper, was black and white. Jennifer's, Buttercup, was pure white. Timothy's rabbit, Cotton, was the smallest, a dwarf breed with soft gray fur. For the first time, neighbors observed the Whitmore children showing something resembling joy. They would spend hours at the hutch, stroking their rabbits, speaking to them in soft voices. Thomas had built a small area where each child could sit with their rabbit, separated by low dividers so they each had their own space. Patricia brought them carrots and lettuce from the kitchen. For a brief season, the Whitmore home almost seemed normal, but those who paid close attention noticed inconsistencies in this tableau of suburban happiness. The children never took their rabbits out of the designated sitting areas. They never ran with them in the grass or brought them inside on cold days. It was as if the rabbits, like everything else in the Whitmore household, existed within carefully controlled boundaries that could not be crossed. Thomas became obsessive about the rabbit care. He kept detailed logs of feeding times, weights, and behaviors. He installed a lock on the hutch gate and kept the only key on his person. Neighbors found this odd. Why lock up rabbits? But no one questioned it directly. In 1970s suburban Michigan, a man's property was his domain. The first crack in the Whitmore family's facade appeared in October 1974, though its significance wouldn't be understood for nearly 4 years. Incident 1, the school counselor's report, October 1974 MRs. Eleanor Hayworth had been a school counselor at Bloomfield Middle School for 18 years. She'd seen troubled children before, but something about Margaret Whitmore's essay disturbed her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. The assignment had been simple: write about a perfect day. Most students wrote about trips to Cedar Point Amusement Park or family vacations up north. Margaret's essay, submitted on October 17, 1974, was different. A perfect day, she wrote, is when everyone is sleeping, when the house is quiet and no one asks questions, when I can sit with Clover and tell her things without anyone listening. Clover is the only one who understands the rules. She never breaks them. I wish I could be more like Clover. She never complains about her hutch. She knows her hutch is safe. Outside, the hutch is dangerous. Father says this all the time. A perfect day is when we all stay in our hutches where nothing can hurt us. Mrs. Hayworth read this essay 3 times before scheduling a meeting with Margaret. The girl arrived at her office on October 23rd, accompanied by her father. I wanted to discuss Margaret's recent essay, Mrs. Hayworth began, sliding the paper across her desk. Thomas Whitmore read it without expression. I don't see the problem. Some of the language is concerning. This reference to hutches. We have rabbits, Thomas interrupted, his voice flat and precise. Margaret has an active imagination. She's comparing her room to the rabbit hutch. Children anthropomorphize. It's developmentally normal. Mrs. Hayworth glanced at Margaret, who sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. Margaret, when you wrote about hutches, what did you mean? The silence stretched for 15 seconds. Mrs. Hayworth counted them. What my father said, Margaret finally whispered. Thomas stood. If there's nothing else, Margaret has homework to complete. They left. Mrs. Hayworth filed a report with the school social worker, noting potential concerning family dynamics. The social worker, overwhelmed with cases of actual physical abuse, filed it away. Margaret Whitmore had no bruises, no signs of neglect. She was well-fed, well-dressed, achieving academically. The report disappeared into a drawer. Incident 2, the pediatrician's observation, March 1975 DR. Raymond Foster had been the Whitmore family pediatrician since Margaret's birth. He prided himself on his observational skills, his ability to read the unspoken dynamics between parent and child. On March 12, 1975, Patricia brought all 6 children in for their annual checkups. This in itself was unusual. Most parents staggered the appointments. But Patricia insisted they all be seen on the same day, one after another. Dr. Foster noticed immediately that the children had lost weight since their last visit. Not drastically, each was still within normal ranges. But the trend concerned him. Margaret, now nearly 15, looked undernourished for her age. Robert's ribs were visible through his shirt. Are the children eating well? He asked Patricia. They're picky eaters, she responded, that nervous laugh punctuating her words. Tom says they need to learn discipline about food. Clean play club, you know. What disturbed Dr. Foster more than the weight loss was the children's behavior. They sat in perfect formation in his waiting room, oldest to youngest, hands in laps, silent. When he called each one back for examination, they moved like soldiers. No running, no typical childhood resistance to the doctor's office. During David's examination, the 7-year-old suddenly spoke. Dr. Foster, If someone stays very still and very quiet, can they stop breathing without knowing it? The question chilled the room. Patricia's face drained of color. That's a silly question, David, she said quickly. Dr. Foster doesn't have time for silly questions. But Dr. Foster knelt to David's level. Why do you ask that, buddy? David's eyes darted to his mother, then back to the doctor. Father says if we practice being still enough, we can learn to control everything about our bodies. Like the rabbits, they can slow their hearts down when they're scared. Father says that's the safest thing. David, Patricia's voice cut through the room like a blade. We don't bother the doctor with Father's science lessons. Dr. Foster tried to pursue the conversation, but David had shut down completely, retreating into that eerie stillness all the children exhibited. After the appointment, Dr. Foster pulled Patricia aside. Mrs. Whitmore, some of David's comments concern me. Is everything all right at home? Everything's fine, she said, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. Tom is very interested in science, in teaching the children about biology. David takes things too literally sometimes. Dr. Foster documented his concerns in the children's medical files. Children exhibit unusual effect in concerning weight loss. Mother appears anxious. Recommend follow-up in 3 months. But when his receptionist called to schedule that follow-up in June, Patricia canceled, saying they'd switch to a different practice. Incident 3, the neighbor's complaint. August 1976, Kathleen Morrison lived 3 houses down from the Whitmores. On the evening of August 14, 1976, she was weeding her garden when she heard what sounded like children crying. The sound came from the Whitmore backyard. Kathleen stood, brushing dirt from her knees, and listened. There it was again, a muffled sobbing, then silence, then sobbing again. She walked to the property line. The Whitmores had a tall privacy fence, unusual for the neighborhood where most families had open yards to foster community. Through a gap between boards, she could see the rabbit hutch. All 6 Whitmore children sat in the individual compartments of the sitting area, each holding their rabbit. But they weren't sitting normally. They were in what looked like stress positions, kneeling with their backs perfectly straight, arms extended, holding the rabbits out in front of them. Thomas Whitmore stood before them like a drill sergeant, holding what appeared to be a stopwatch. Stillness is safety, his voice carried across the yard. Movement is danger. Susan, your arms are shaking. Begin again. The 9-year-old let out a sob as she lowered and then re-raised her arms. Crying is movement, Thomas said. Begin again. Kathleen stood frozen, unsure what she was witnessing. Was this punishment, exercise, some strange parenting technique? She watched for another 5 minutes as the children held their positions, muscles trembling, silent tears streaming down some of their faces. When Thomas finally allowed them to lower their rabbits, he made each child recite, "My hutch is my haven, outside is chaos, stillness is safety." Kathleen called the police non-emergency line that evening. She described what she'd seen, trying to articulate why it disturbed her. The dispatcher sounded skeptical. "Did you see him hit the children?" "No, but did they appear injured?" "Not exactly, but the way—" "Ma'am, we can't intervene in parenting choices unless there's clear evidence of abuse. Teaching children discipline isn't illegal." "This wasn't discipline," Kathleen insisted. "This was something else. A patrol officer did drive by the Whitmore house later that week." Thomas answered the door, invited the officer in, showed him the immaculate home, introduced him to the well-groomed children. The officer filed a report. No evidence of abuse or neglect. Home appears well-maintained. Children appear healthy. Kathleen Morrison never reported her concerns again. Years later, she would tell investigators, "I convinced myself I'd overreacted. But I saw those children's faces. They were terrified. And I did nothing." Incident 4. The church departure. December 1976, Reverend Paul Hutchins had led Bloomfield Presbyterian Church for 12 years. He knew most of his congregation intimately. But the Whitmore family remained an enigma. They attended every Sunday, sitting in the same pew, 3rd row from the back on the right side. The children never attended Sunday school, despite multiple invitations. Patricia explained they were too sensitive for group activities. Thomas rarely spoke to other parishioners, arriving exactly as services began and leaving immediately after the benediction. On December 19, 1976, during the children's Christmas pageant, Reverend Hutchins noticed the Whitmore family watching from their usual pew. Every other family had children participating in the pageant, dressed as angels, shepherds, wise men. The Whitmore children sat in their row, perfectly still, watching other children sing and celebrate. After the service, Reverend Hutchins approached Thomas. "Mr. Whitmore, I wanted to extend another invitation for your children to join our youth programs. They're missing out on wonderful fellowship opportunities." Thomas's expression remained neutral. "My children receive all the fellowship they require at home, but socialization with peers is so important." "Reverend Hutchins," Thomas interrupted, "the world is a dangerous place. Other children are unpredictable, chaotic. They spread disease, both physical and moral. My children are protected. They understand their boundaries. They're learning to be still, to be safe. This is what good parents do. They protect." The intensity in Thomas's eyes made Reverend Hutchins step back. "I see. Well, if you ever change your mind, we won't." The Whitmore family stopped attending services in January 1977. When Reverend Hutchins called to check on them, Patricia answered. She sounded distant, defeated. "Tom feels the church is too chaotic for the children," she said. "Too much noise, too many people. He's right. It's safer at home." "Patricia, if you need anything, if you need to talk..." She hung up. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. Share this with someone who loves dark mysteries. Let's discover what happens next. March 14, 1978, 9:47 a.m. The excavator's bucket tears through the earth on what will become the Bloomfield Plaza shopping center. The Whitmore estate had been sold 14 months earlier, the house already demolished, the property cleared for commercial development. Worker Michael Donnelly is operating the excavator when he feels the resistance, that subtle change in pressure that signals something solid beneath the soil. He's expecting rocks, maybe old foundation stones. What his bucket reveals is wood. Donnelly shuts off the machine and climbs down. His foreman, Jack Peterson, is already jogging across the site. They stare into the excavated section, where a corner of what appears to be a box protrudes from the dark soil. "Could be an old septic tank," Peterson suggests. But Donnelly is already shaking his head. The wood is too fine, too finished. It's been carefully constructed, with joints that fit precisely together. He drops into the pit and brushes away more soil. "Jack," his voice wavers, "we need to call the police." The box is small. Child-sized. Detective Sarah Brennan arrives at 10:23 a.m. She's been with Bloomfield Township Police for 8 years, primarily handling property crimes and the occasional domestic dispute. Nothing in her experience has prepared her for what she finds. The construction crew has been ordered to step back. Brennan approaches the excavation carefully, her camera ready. She photographs the exposed box from multiple angles before giving the signal to continue excavation by hand. It takes 45 minutes to fully expose the first box. It measures approximately 4 feet long, 2 feet wide, 18 inches deep. The wood, while deteriorated, shows signs of careful construction. Dovetail joints, evidence of varnish, a small brass plate on top. The plate is tarnished but readable. Engraved in careful script, Margaret Rose Whitmore, at peace, 1974. Brennan's hands shake as she radios for backup. "We need forensics, we need the medical examiner, and we need them now." Dr. Philip Warren, the county medical examiner, takes over the scene at 11:40 a.m. By this time, ground-penetrating radar has revealed what everyone fears: multiple anomalies in the soil, arranged in 2 rows of 3. They excavate the first box fully. Dr. Warren insists on doing this himself, working with brushes and hand tools, treating it like an archaeological dig, because that's what it is, a grave. When they open Margaret's box, the smell is minimal. The body has been sealed so completely that decomposition has been slow, contained. What remains inside makes Dr. Warren, a 23-year veteran, step back and breathe deeply before continuing. The skeleton is arranged with unnatural precision. The girl, and it's clearly the skeleton of an adolescent female, lies on her back, legs straight, arms positioned across her chest. In those arms, she holds the skeleton of a rabbit. The rabbit's skull rests just beneath the girl's chin. Its tiny skeletal paws seem to touch her collarbones. Both skeletons are intact. Neither shows signs of trauma. There are no broken bones, no indication of violence. In the box with them, a small pillow, the remains of a blanket embroidered with rabbits, and a child's diary, its pages warped but readable. Dr. Warren's preliminary examination notes will later read, "Subject appears to be female, approximately 14 to 15 years old at time of death. No visible trauma to skeletal remains. Presence of rabbit skeleton suggests deliberate placement post-mortem. Cause of death cannot be determined from skeletal examination alone. Toxicology impossible due to decomposition. This is unlike any burial I have encountered. They find Robert's box next, then Susan's, then David's, then Jennifer's, then Timothy's. 6 children, 6 rabbits. Each child holding their assigned pet. Each box identical in construction. Each brass plate engraved with a name, date, and at peace. The dates are staggered. Margaret, October 1974. Robert, March 1975. Susan, August 1976. David, December 1976. Jennifer, April 1977. Timothy, September 1977. The children died over 3 years, one every 6 to 8 months, in age order from oldest to youngest. By 3:00 p.m., the scene has transformed into a major incident. The FBI has been notified. News helicopters circle overhead, despite police attempts to maintain security. Forensic teams work in the growing darkness, erecting lights around the excavation site. Detective Brennan stands at the edge of the pit, looking down at 6 small boxes arranged in perfect symmetry. She's been reading Margaret's diary, which forensic specialists carefully removed from the first box. The entries are brief, written in careful, perfect handwriting. October 2nd, 1974. Father says the world is getting more dangerous. We must practice stillness. Clover is so good at being still. I want to be like Clover. October 10th, 1974. Father says the safest place is sleep. Deep sleep where nothing can hurt you. He says he can teach us. Mother cries, but Father says she'll understand. October 15th, 1974. Tonight is my night. Father says I'm the oldest, so I go first. I'm scared, but Father says there's nothing to fear in forever sleep. I'll be with Clover. We'll be still together, safe forever. The diary ends there. Detective Brennan closes the diary and looks up at the lights illuminating the gravesite. She thinks about the Whitmore house that once stood here, now demolished and cleared away. She thinks about neighbors who must have seen something, anything. Over 3 years of children disappearing one by one. Where are the parents? She asks the forensic supervisor. That's the question, he replies. Records show Thomas and Patricia Whitmore sold this property in January 1978 and left Michigan. No forwarding address. We're trying to track them now. In the growing crowd of onlookers held back by police tape, Kathleen Morrison stands with her hand over her mouth, remembering that August evening when she saw the children in the rabbit hutch yard, holding their pets in those stress positions, reciting their strange mantra. My hutch is my haven. Outside is chaos. Stillness is safety. She understands now what she witnessed. Thomas Whitmore training his children for death, teaching them to accept it, preparing them to go quietly into forever sleep. The investigation into the Whitmore murders becomes the largest manhunt in Michigan history. Detective Sarah Brennan leads a task force that includes FBI agents, state police, and forensic specialists from across the country. The first challenge, finding Thomas and Patricia Whitmore. Property records show they sold the Bloomfield Township estate to a development company in January 1978 for $47,000, significantly below market value, suggesting desperation or planning. The attorney who handled the sale, Gordon Mitchell, tells investigators he met with Thomas only once. He wanted cash, wanted it done quickly, didn't negotiate. I thought it was odd, but the paperwork was legitimate. Bank records reveal Thomas closed all Whitmore accounts on January 12, 1978, withdrawing $23,000 in cash. His employment with the automotive supplier ended December 30, 1977, listed as a resignation. Neighbors report seeing the Whitmores load a U-Haul truck on the evening of January 14th. No one spoke to them, no one said goodbye, they vanished. While the search continues, forensic teams work to understand how 6 children died without anyone noticing their disappearance. Dr. Philip Warren conducts extensive post-mortem examinations of all 6 victims. Without soft tissue, determining cause of death proves nearly impossible. However, he makes several significant findings. The children show no signs of physical trauma. No fractured bones, no defensive wounds, no indication of violence. Their bones reveal malnutrition patterns consistent with restricted caloric intake over extended periods. Margaret's skeleton shows arrested growth patterns suggesting prolonged starvation. The younger children show similar progressive malnutrition. What I'm seeing, Dr. Warren testifies later, is systematic gradual deprivation. These children were literally wasted away over time. It's one of the cruelest forms of abuse I've encountered. Toxicology on the rabbit remains provides the first break. Testing reveals high concentrations of barbiturates in all 6 rabbit skeletons, specifically phenobarbital, a sedative commonly prescribed in the 1970s. Pharmacy records from 1973 to 1977 show Patricia Whitmore filled monthly prescriptions for phenobarbital, prescribed by Dr. Leonard Hayes for anxiety and insomnia. The prescriptions were legitimate, but the quantities were excessive. Over 4 years, Patricia obtained enough phenobarbital to sedate a person daily for more than a decade. The theory investigators develop is horrific in its calculated cruelty. Thomas Whitmore, suffering from what psychologists would later diagnose as a severe delusional disorder with paranoid features, became convinced that the outside world posed existential danger to his children. His solution was not to protect them from the world, but to remove them from it entirely. Over 3 years, he systematically starved and sedated his children one by one, oldest to youngest, creating what he believed were peaceful deaths. He killed their rabbits first, using the same sedatives, then placed the animals in the children's arms as they lost consciousness for the final time. He buried each child with elaborate care, in boxes he constructed himself, with their rabbits as companions in death. Patricia's role remains more complex and disturbing. Evidence suggests she didn't merely enable Thomas, she participated. Witnesses would later testify to hearing her voice during the stillness training sessions. Her name appears on pharmacy records. She helped construct the narrative of the children's isolation. But what happened to the children's bodies while they lived? Why didn't anyone notice 6 children disappearing over 3 years? The answer lies in Thomas Whitmore's meticulous planning and the Whitmores' already established pattern of isolation. In October 1974, when Margaret disappeared, Thomas and Patricia told neighbors she'd been sent to a boarding school for gifted children in Vermont. They showed letters from Margaret, describing her new school, her classes, her adjustment. The letters were typewritten, signed with Margaret's name, convincingly authentic. Only later would investigators realize Thomas had written them himself on a typewriter found in the U-Haul truck. When Robert vanished in March 1975, the story was similar, a special mathematics program at a private academy. By the time Susan disappeared in August 1976, neighbors had stopped asking questions. The Whitmore children had always been isolated, strange, unavailable. Their gradual disappearance fit the family's established pattern. The school district received official withdrawal notifications for each child, signed by Patricia Whitmore, citing enrollment in private institutions. No one followed up. In the 1970s, before computerized record-keeping and stricter truancy laws, children could slip through administrative cracks. Dr. Foster, the pediatrician who had documented concerns, had lost track of the family after they switched practices. Mrs. Hayworth, the school counselor, had moved to another district. Reverend Hutchins assumed they'd found another church. Kathleen Morrison convinced herself she'd overreacted. Each individual saw only fragments. No one assembled the complete picture. By September 1977, when 3-year-old Timothy died, the Whitmore family had no children left. Yet no one had reported them missing. Thomas and Patricia lived alone in that house for 4 more months, walking past the backyard where 6 small bodies lay buried beneath the rabbit hutch, before selling the property and disappearing. The manhunt for Thomas and Patricia Whitmore spans 2 years and crosses international borders. The first major break comes in August 1978. A bank teller in Vancouver, British Columbia, recognizes Patricia Whitmore from news coverage. She'd cashed a money order under the name Patricia Morton. By the time Canadian authorities respond, the Whitmores have fled. Over the next 18 months, verified sightings placed them in Seattle, Portland, Sacramento, and eventually Mexico. They're living transient lives, staying in cheap motels, using cash, avoiding documentation. Patricia appears increasingly unstable in witness descriptions, disheveled, speaking to herself, exhibiting paranoid behaviors. On February 23, 1980, Mexican police find Patricia Whitmore living alone in a rented room in Puerto Vallarta. She's emaciated and incoherent, suffering from what psychiatrists later diagnose as a complete psychotic break. Under questioning, she tells authorities Thomas is dead. She claims he killed himself in a motel in Guadalajara in December 1979, although she cannot or will not say where his body is located. Mexican authorities never verify this claim. Thomas Whitmore remains a fugitive, though most investigators believe Patricia's story. Patricia is extradited to Michigan in March 1980. The trial of Patricia Whitmore begins in October 1980 and becomes a media sensation. Court TV broadcasts portions live. The New York Times covers it daily. The case raises fundamental questions about maternal responsibility, mental illness, and the nature of evil. Patricia's defense team argues she was a victim of Thomas's control, suffering from severe psychological abuse that left her unable to resist his delusional commands. Prosecution argues she was an active participant who helped kill 6 children over 3 years. The evidence is damning. Pharmacy records, witness testimonies, the meticulous planning required to maintain the deception. But Patricia's mental state complicates everything. She sits in court unresponsive, medicated, occasionally crying but never speaking. Dr. Judith Morrison, a forensic psychiatrist, testifies for the defense. Mrs. Whitmore exhibits symptoms consistent with severe chronic trauma and learned helplessness. She lived under the absolute control of a severely mentally ill spouse who gradually convinced her that killing their children was not only necessary but merciful. This is not an excuse, but it is context. The prosecution counters with testimony from Kathleen Morrison, Eleanor Hayworth, Dr. Foster, people who interacted with Patricia, who saw her participate in the isolation and training of the children, who watched her smile and make excuses while her children died. Margaret's diary is read aloud in court. The final entry, "Father says I'm the oldest, so I go first. I'm scared, but Father says there's nothing to fear and forever sleep," leaves the courtroom in tears. On January 14, 1981, the jury convicts Patricia Whitmore on 6 counts of first-degree murder and 6 counts of child abuse resulting in death. The trial judge, William Harrison, sentences her to 6 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. "You helped create a hell for your children," Judge Harrison says during sentencing. "You participated in their systematic destruction. Whether you were controlled or complicit, the result is the same. 6 children are dead. You will spend the rest of your life accounting for that." Patricia doesn't react. She's transferred to the Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility where she remains to this day, now 76 years old, diagnosed with chronic schizophrenia, residing in the psychiatric unit. She has never spoken publicly about the murders. Thomas Whitmore is never found. An international warrant remains active, though most investigators believe he died in Mexico in 1979, as Patricia claimed. His name appears on FBI's most wanted list until 1995, when the case is moved to inactive status. The aftermath extends far beyond the courtroom. Bloomfield Township struggles with its role in the tragedy. How did 6 children die without anyone intervening? The question haunts the community. The elementary school establishes a memorial garden with 6 trees, each marked with a child's name. The Rabbit Hutch site, briefly considered for a memorial, becomes instead a parking lot. No one wants to remember what happened. Kathleen Morrison undergoes intensive therapy for guilt and PTSS. She becomes an advocate for child welfare, speaking publicly about the importance of reporting concerns even when uncertain. "I saw something wrong," she tells audiences. "I reported it once, then stopped when I was dismissed. Those children died because adults, me included, didn't push hard enough." Dr. Foster changes his practice protocols, implementing mandatory follow-ups for concerning observations. He never forgives himself for losing track of the Whitmore children after they switched practices. Eleanor Hayworth keeps Margaret's essay in her files until her retirement. She frames it as a reminder. Every concern matters. Every child deserves advocacy. The Whitmore case becomes a catalyst for significant changes in child protection systems across America. In 1982, Michigan passes the Margaret Whitmore Act, requiring cross-agency communication when multiple institutions report concerns about the same family. The law mandates that schools, medical providers, and social services share information when child welfare concerns are raised, creating a comprehensive picture rather than isolated observations. By 1985, 32 states adopt similar legislation. The Whitmore case becomes a teaching tool in social work programs, law schools, and medical schools nationwide, an example of systemic failure and the dangers of isolated intervention attempts. The case also forces difficult conversations about homeschooling regulations. In the 1970s, parents could remove children from school with minimal oversight. The Whitmores exploited this, creating fictional private schools to explain their children's absence. By the late 1980s, most states implement stricter requirements for educational withdrawal, including documentation of actual enrollment elsewhere, or formal homeschooling registration. Psychologists study the Whitmore case as an extreme example of folie à deux, shared delusional disorder, where Thomas's paranoid delusions infected Patricia, creating a closed system of belief that rationalized the murder of their children as protection. Dr. Robert Chambers publishes a landmark study in 1983, The Hutch Mentality, Isolation, Control, and Family Annihilation, examining how Thomas Whitmore's metaphor of the rabbit hutch as safety became literal, a place where living things were confined, controlled, and ultimately killed in the name of protection. Thomas Whitmore represents a particular psychology of control, Dr. Chambers writes. He couldn't accept that his children would grow, change, become independent. Rather than release them into an uncertain world, he chose to preserve them in death, still silent, forever contained. The rabbits weren't companions, they were practice. The rabbit hutch itself, discovered during excavation, provides chilling evidence of this psychology. Forensic examination reveals modifications Thomas made over 3 years. The compartments became progressively smaller, more confining. The sitting areas where children held their rabbits were barely large enough for a child to kneel. Locks on individual compartments could only be opened from outside. He was training them to accept confinement, Detective Brennan explains in a 1985 interview. The hutch was a physical manifestation of his control. The children learned that their safety depended on staying within prescribed boundaries, remaining still, accepting limitations. When he transitioned from the hutch to the grave, the children had been so thoroughly conditioned that they accepted it. Margaret's diary supports this interpretation. Her entries show progressive acceptance of increasingly restrictive conditions, internalization of her father's delusions, and finally, resignation to death as the ultimate safety. Similar cases emerge in the wake of the Whitmore investigation. In 1979, authorities in Oregon discover a family where 5 children have been kept in basement cages by parents who believe the outside world was contaminated. In 1982, a father in Texas is arrested after attempting to seal his children in a bomb shelter for their protection. In 1984, a mother in Florida is found to have been systematically isolating and starving her children, following a religious delusion that they needed to be purified. These cases share patterns with the Whitmore murders: extreme parental control, isolation from outside monitoring, delusional belief systems that frame abuse as protection, and the exploitation of gaps in child welfare systems. The Whitmore case forces society to confront an uncomfortable truth: the privacy of the family home can become a shield for unimaginable cruelty. The parental right to raise children without interference, so valued in American culture, can be weaponized by those who view children as property to be controlled rather than individuals to be nurtured. Today, the Bloomfield Plaza shopping center operates where the Whitmore estate once stood. Shoppers park above the ground where 6 children were buried with their rabbits. Most are unaware of the location's history, but sometimes on quiet evenings when the plaza closes, security guards report an unsettling sound, like children whispering, reciting something in unison. They dismiss it as wind through the ventilation systems, but those familiar with the case hear something else in that rhythmic whisper. My hutch is my haven, outside is chaos. Stillness is safety. The Whitmore children remain buried in Oakland Hills Memorial Gardens, in a section donated by the cemetery. Their graves are marked with simple stones bearing their names, birth dates, and a single shared phrase: finally free. Patricia Whitmore remains incarcerated. In 44 years, she has never spoken about the murders, never shown remorse, never acknowledged what she and Thomas did. Her psychiatric evaluations describe her as existing in a permanent dissociative state, mentally residing in some earlier time before the horrors began. Thomas Whitmore, if he survived his flight to Mexico, would be 93 years old. Most investigators believe he's dead, having taken his own life as Patricia claimed, but his name remains on watch lists, and his photograph, those wire-rimmed glasses, that emotionless stare, still circulates to law enforcement agencies worldwide. The case remains officially open. What the Whitmore murders reveal about human nature is perhaps their most disturbing legacy. They demonstrate how ordinary people, a suburban accountant and his wife, respectable members of their community, can commit extraordinary evil when their worldview becomes sufficiently distorted. Thomas and Patricia Whitmore believed they were good parents. They believed they were protecting their children from a dangerous world. They believed that death was preferable to the uncertainty of life. They were utterly, horrifically wrong. But the case also reveals systemic failures. How a school counselor's report can be filed away. How a pediatrician's concerns can be lost in administrative transitions. How a neighbor's phone call can be dismissed as overreaction. Each person who encountered warning signs did something, but no one did enough. The 6 Whitmore children died not just because of their parents' delusions, but because of societal blind spots that allowed those delusions to operate unchecked for 3 years. What do you think drove Thomas Whitmore to such acts? Was it pure mental illness, or something darker, a need for absolute control that escalated until death seemed like the ultimate form of possession? And what about Patricia? Was she a victim of his manipulation, or an equal participant in these unthinkable crimes? Leave your theories in the comments below. These questions have haunted investigators, psychologists, and true crime researchers for over 4 decades. Your perspective matters to our community of mystery seekers. If this story affected you, please subscribe to Fear Sermon for more lost chapters of American history, the cases that changed how we protect children, the tragedies that reformed our systems, and the dark truths that remind us why vigilance matters. Remember, if you ever see something that concerns you, speak up. Push back if you're dismissed. The Whitmore children's story is a reminder that silence can be complicit, that every concern deserves investigation, that children depend on adults to advocate when they cannot advocate for themselves. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video, where we'll explore